Hello and welcome to the Empathy Unbound podcast. Today I'm joined by Marilyn Raichle. Marilyn began her career in the theatre. She founded the Seattle International Children's Festival, introducing children to world culture through the performing arts. In 2007, she received a Master of Public Administration from Harvard University's Kennedy School of Government. Upon returning to Seattle, her career was upended when she became a care partner for her parents, both of whom were developing dementia. Inspired by her mother's newfound artistic creativity, she founded the Art of Alzheimer's, celebrating the creativity of people living with dementia and the power of the creative arts to enrich and empower their lives. In 2019, she became the Executive Director, Maud's Awards for Innovative in Alzheimer's Care, celebrating and rewarding innovative programs, practices of care that are enhancing the lives of people living with dementia and their care partners. As many of you know, my mum passed away of dementia just over a year ago. So this is a really close topic to me, and I was lucky enough to explore the incredible book that Marilyn and her mother produced, and we'll talk about that a little bit later on. But it really was quite eye-opening, I thought, when I found it. So Marilyn, you're very welcome to our podcast. Thank you for joining us. And yeah, I've got a lot of questions for you, so hopefully you're ready to answer. We'll talk about the current life in a second, but I just wanted to understand what was your childhood like? What was the foundations that you built your life upon? What created the person that's joining us today?
Well, it was complicated. I
Mhm.
grew up in a family that had two big families on each side, the Scottish Calvinists on one side, the German Lutherans on the other. Lots of family activities, lots of laughter. But there were rules. The word love was never spoken. Um, Emotions were considered an unnecessary indulgence. And mother who and this the Scottish side of the family was really influential,
Mhm.
and mother prized achievement and leadership, and I grew up knowing that winning was the most important thing. It was very competitive with my older brothers and sisters, and then I have one younger brother, and so I sort of had two me's. I had the public me, which was very confident, very powerful, and then I had the private me, which was very fearful and uncertain. I think I was playing two roles. I think that's probably what drove me into the theater, is that I was used to playing roles. So when I so that was my life up until I became a care partner with mother.
What is it like going through childhood and young adulthood when the word love isn't spoken? How does that work?
You just tuck it in, take it. I always referred to my upbringing as a tough room.
Yeah.
Um, and it's just something you get used to. I mean, we had rules like there were no funerals, there were no memorial services, and when someone dies, there were no tears. So to say that I was emotionally unavailable is an understatement.
Mm. So I do want to dig into that a bit more, but I did want to sort of selfishly just dive into the relationship with your family and how Alzheimer's first came into your life. So I know that nearly everyone in your dad's family and many in your mum's family developed the disease. And I wondered if you could recall what was your first recollection or understanding of Alzheimer's.
Just that it was something to be feared. We grew up thinking that it was like a death, probably worse than death, but
Mm.
there was always the who got it next, who was next. But once somebody developed, because all my father's brothers and sisters were like really much older than he was. And so we didn't have, once somebody developed dementia, we didn't have much contact with them. It was
Mhm.
sort of like we moved on. You weren't supposed to go there, but it was just something to be feared. And that was about it.
It's funny, isn't it? Funny is the wrong word, but I find the same with my mum. I guess I'd never known anybody with it before. And until you do know somebody with it, and every person has a different experience of dementia, of Alzheimer's. There's no one size fits all. Um, and you do get on with it, I guess. But one of the things that surprises might be the wrong word, but you talked about there not being a lot of use of the word love in the house, or no use of the word love, being a difficult upbringing. So you still took the decision to come back to Seattle and become the primary carer for your parents. And I know that your mum said to you at one stage, keep your distance. Your father and I have been a safe place. There's nothing more you can do, so walk away. Why did you why did you stay? Why did you become the primary carer?
Well, I had no choice. I came back from graduate school, and it was during the recession, and there were no jobs.
Mhm.
And so I was having a really hard time getting a job. So my older brothers and sisters decided that, okay, we'll toss you a lifeline and you can become the primary caregiver for mom and dad. Okay. And became a job. And mom and dad were living in a really good continuing care facility, which most people cannot afford, which
Mm.
is a big thing of mine that it's so unfair. But and she said this over and over. I mean, this was the walk away was sort of the leitmotif of her upbringing. It's like, do not go there, do not take on that burden. So it was a job. It took on sort of three stages. The first one, I really didn't want to be there. Mother's words were always in the back of my mind: walk away. He's always looking at the clock. Dad had Parkinson's and was developing dementia from both Parkinson's and dementia. And was Mom had started to develop dementia in her early 80s, which we didn't expect. We expected it from dad, but not mom.
Mm.
Um, I mean, this is a family where as teenagers, we developed ways to kill my father when he got Alzheimer's. We were a ghoulish family in that respect. So you make fun of it. You make fun of it. And so the first year, I really didn't want to be there, but I did and I wasn't good. I wasn't good at all. And I didn't want to know. But then I started to listen, and they were my parents, and I did love them. And the interesting thing about mom and dad is that mom, who basically considered herself my father's caregiver,
Mm.
um, uh, she wanted the best for my father, and dad wanted the best for my mother, and I wanted the best for both of them. So their needs became my needs. So we weren't sharing loss, we weren't sharing sadness, we were sharing shared purpose. And that was significant.
Mm.
That sort of enabled me to sort of slow down and listen and be there more for them. And then dad died at the age of 89. And mother was, and they'd been together for 72 years. They adored one another. Um, and when dad died, um, we were in the room with him, my brother and sister, and I with dad, and mom was sleeping. And we thought, should we wake her up to say goodbye? And I thought, well, will she even remember? Will she have to live through this every day? But we did. And I've never seen such tears. I mean, this is a family, you do not cry. You just do not cry. And so after a while, we got her to go back to sleep. And I got there early the next morning, and she remembered. And we talked about dad and what a wonderful man he was. And the second day I got there early, and she remembered. And the third morning I got there, and she was lying down, and she was sort of quietly crying. And she said, I just want to be with your father. And without thinking, I thought of what mother would have said. And I said, well, mom, you should have thought of that before you started taking such good care of yourself. And she laughed, and she said, well, that's life. And from then on, she put it in somewhere, but regained her interest in life. And that was the next phase. And so it was a really interesting journey. And
Mm.
at that point, I still hadn't fully embraced being her care partner. And I'm going to say care partner at this point because as a caregiver, Horizon House, this wonderful place where they were living, they were taking care of most of her care. I made sure she was going to doctor's appointments, and and we played Scrabble every single day. And but it took me about a year to become her partner. But the key to all of this was the art, because mother was really bored. So I took her to a painting class, and she thought it was a silly thing to do. Um, but her paintings were so interesting that I kept wanting to see more and see more. And that lured me back in and sidestepped the fear and enabled me to see the woman who was there. And we were sharing joy. And if all you can see is sadness, that's all you will share.
Yeah.
But once we were starting to share joy, then then the world opened.
So how did the relationship change? And it sounds like a very different relationship once you had decided to become that care partner through choice rather than through need. So what was how did the relationship develop between I guess it changes between child and parent as the child becomes more of a caregiver when parents are always supposed to be there to, kiss away the hurt, whatever. How did the relationship
Well,
change?
you always hear that thing of I became the mother, she became the daughter. I mean, the child. And it was never like that with mom precisely because she was always my mother.
Yeah.
She was always teaching me things. I always would afford her that respect. But what changed was I started to care about her in a different way. I wanted to make sure that she was happy. I wanted to make sure that she had peace of mind. I wanted to make sure that she was content. And it was that change that I was affording her her personhood. And I had never as a child I wanted to make her proud of me, and that was about it.
Mhm.
And then you moved on. It was her job to make us all very happy. But now it was my responsibility to make her happy. And when I became her, there was this one moment when she was painting, and her painting started to deteriorate to me. Less interest, scratchy brush lines, same image, same colors. And so one day I got there early and we did and at this point I was seeing her like once, I mean, not that often, just I would leave work, go. But I got there early and we did everything she loved to do. We played Scrabble, we looked at the view, we took a walk, we sang songs, and then I took her to our painting class. And I always had to take her because if I didn't take her, she wouldn't go. I took her to her painting class, and the paintings completely changed. All of a sudden, warm animal images appeared, and sense of humor started to pop into her paintings. And I realized, oh, I see. We're in this together. We're partners. And she was enriching my life, and I was enriching her life. And that was our life of how we then built a life together.
Did the painting and the painting she did they bring a calm peace? Did they make her laugh? Did she what did the activity of painting bring to your mum's life, do you think?
Well, she thought it was silly. She thought it was stupid. She denied that she painted anything. There was only in all of the years, for the next 7 years, she only acknowledged one painting as hers. The rest of them, she would say, I don't do this. What she was interested in was the group of people around the table. It was
Yeah.
joining a group,
Mhm.
and that interested her. She was really fast. She was faster than anybody else. But what was interesting is that once she lifted the brush and put a color on paper, she started to hum,
Mhm.
and she was totally engaged. And she didn't pay attention to anything else. She would paint until she was through. And then when she was through, we would have her sign it, and then she would leave. And sometimes she would leave and she'd be walking around the halls and she'd see this group of people at the tables and she'd say, May I join you? And they would say, Why, certainly. So she would sit down and paint again. Um, and the paintings changed over time. Um, at first, when she saw a flower, she would paint a flower. And then she started to transform them. So a zucchini became a dragon, and
Yeah.
flowers became these smiling faces. And my favorite of all time is the orange meanie. An orange butternut squash became this jaunty little creature with a face that looked exactly like a blue meanie from Yellow Submarine. And it hangs over my kitchen sink.
Fabulous.
Kitchen chores have never been so much fun. And, and so but she still wouldn't acknowledge it as hers. When I tell her her paintings were good, she said, I didn't do that. Or once she said, I must have gotten that from your father's side of the family. Um, and I'm not sure why she refused to admit that she painted, or on a conscious level,
Mm.
she didn't do this. Interesting. But she enjoyed it. But I think she enjoyed the group more.
Yeah.
And I saved every painting because otherwise she would just throw them away.
Yeah. It's funny, isn't it? Because part of me thinks it shows how little we understand about the brain, how she came up with the sort of transformation of zucchini to dragon and something else to mermaid and something else to butterfly. You just think, well, how did those things come about, and why? But thankfully, it was a good thing they did, and thankfully, he created. And I said before, the most beautiful book. That's the best way to
But I
describe
think she was, excuse me for interrupting, but I think she was painting her emotions.
it. Yeah,
She wasn't painting what was there. She was painting her emotions, so that the cover of the book is this little odd picture of this odd little creature walking. And the painting was of pink carnations. So I started to name the paintings by what she was painting because you would have no idea.
yeah,
And most of them in the early days had faces.
yeah. I wonder what they meant to her somewhere deep, and who they're representing and what they're representing, and yeah, and it's interesting that they changed over time. And that sort of indicates that she felt more comfortable, and as you say, it felt the energy of people from around her, felt the value of you taking her to the classes, and it just became, yeah, it would have been a different life if you hadn't encouraged her to go to that first painting class. So,
Mhm.
good. So when you created the book, "Don't Walk Away: A Care Partner's Journey," which is incredibly beautiful, just how did the idea come about? What was the process of the writing, collating it? How did that thought spark
Well,
in
thank
your
you.
head, and why did you do it?
Well, first, thank you. And it started. The first thing is that whenever I would see Mother, and by this time I needed to see her, I was seeing her every day.
Mhm.
Um, and I would write down every single thing we said and did in real time every day, just because I didn't want to lose it. So I had this long journal of everything we did. Um, and I also kept all the paintings and what she was painting and what she painted. Um, and the interesting thing is that when I started sharing the art with people, their first comment was always the same: I had no idea. And and I thought, well, and they were all so grateful to experience a story about Alzheimer's that was happy, that
Yeah,
was joyous, um, and that gave them hope as potential care partners. One person asked me once, his wife was developing dementia, and he said, I know you work in this field. Do you have any advice? And I said, well, first of all, understand that I believe that there is every reason to think that she can live with meaning and purpose and joy. And he said, you're the only person who said that to me. And I said, well, it's true. And then he said, now what? And so this book is also my intent to answer now what, because along the way, I learned a lot about,
mm,
because I knew nothing. So I learned a lot. So I wanted to invite people to take a walk with me and Mom, to experience a life with dementia that was joyous, and to experience my evolution as a care partner. Um, and so it is, and I want to make people laugh, because most people don't even want to read books about Alzheimer's because it's so depressing. But
yeah,
this one will make you laugh. And which was another virtue in the family, laughter. Um, and so it was this process. I thought, well, this is writing a book was never in my long term plans, but I thought, well, let's write a book and put all this down and see if I can do this. And it took me a really long time, and I was very fortunate because this wonderful man named John Zeisel, who wrote a groundbreaking book about Alzheimer's called I'm Still Here. And I met him through Mods Awards for another reason. And I told him I was writing a book. And he said, well, can I read it? And I said, well, sure. It's in draft form. And he said, well, let me read it. And then he started giving me suggestions. And then after about 6 months, he said, well, I guess you should consider me your editor. And I said, wow, great. So with his help, which was extraordinary, this book came about. And then we found someone to help design it and put it together. Finding a publisher is exceedingly difficult, so it's self-published. But it is sort of my love letter to Mom. And it's my love letter also to the facility in which she lived, which was, would that every single person who has dementia and needs it has access to a good continuing care facility. And
It's
so,
yeah. I was going to ask you about that because that's one of the big things in the UK, and I'm sure it's the same in the US, that the cost of care facilities, the financial cost to the families is extremely high. So in the UK, I guess the average cost per week, like this is an average, would be $2,000 a week, and there's not a lot of families have $2,000 a week
no,
to do that, and it's really difficult. I mean, first of all, it's a difficult decision to decide when to put somebody into assisted living, a care facility, whatever. We feel, we feel guilty for not keeping them at home. We second guess things, all that sort of stuff. But certainly the way you describe and the image of your mum's care facility and the words you use, I think laughter, creativity, music, singing. On one occasion, looked to sing this drumming. I just wondered, yeah, how important that was and how you describe the life your mum had there.
so we'll set aside the fact that everyone needs to have this
Yeah.
opportunity. Mom and Dad moved to Horizon House before they needed it, so they moved there and lived in independent living. My grandparents had also lived there. My aunts and uncles lived there. So they had a sort of family nucleus there. And they knew that someday they would need assisted living, which was part of that walk away thing. We'll be fine. And so when it was time, it was interesting when it was my sister from New York was visiting Dad, and she was talking to him, and he said, I think your mom's slipping a little. And Jeannie said, well, have you thought about assisted living? And he said, I'm not ready. And she said, Dad, I think Mom is. And then I was talking to Mom, and because Dad was in a wheelchair by this time with Parkinson's.
Mm.
And I was saying, Mom, have you considered assisted living for Dad? And she said, no, I'm not ready. And I said, but I think Dad is, Mom. And so it was because they cared about each other that they made that decision to move to assisted living. And then once they moved to assisted living, Mother, who was very industrious and very friendly, she immediately set out about making friends and creating a life there. And she was always going down to the library and somehow always managing to bring them back to her apartment. And it was a process. And at this point, Mom and Dad sort of kept to themselves. Mom sort of wanted to protect him from the nurses who she felt was intruding. She didn't want other people dressing and undressing her husband. And whenever Dad was in his wheelchair, she'd say, hop up, Bob. And every once in a while, he would hop up and then he would fall down. And I said to Mom, Mom, Dad's in a wheelchair. He can't hop up. And she said, no, he's not. And I said to Dad once, I said, Dad, when Mom asks you to hop up, please don't hop up. And most of the time he wouldn't, but sometimes she would sing out, hop up, Bob. And then he fell 22 times that year and didn't break a bone. He was incredibly strong. And so that when Dad died, then Mother started to make friends big time. She had best friends. She had, there was a garden, there were birds, there were all sorts of things she loved to do. And I assumed that she would look forward to my visits. I was her daughter, after all. And then I realized she had a new family. And fortunately for me, they were willing to accept me as a member of their family. So I joined their family, had 6 adopted new mothers. And that became our life together, this wonderful group of people, all singular human beings, all living with contentment. Um, and it was an eye opener for me. And I am a huge, if you can afford it, which is the big caveat, I'm a big proponent of living in a good place, because this gave mother a family, things I couldn't have done, because home caregivers are basically operating without a net.
Yeah.
They do not have the support they need. They're juggling a life with kids and work and their loved one, and it's really hard. And so when people say to me, okay, but your mom lived in this great place, and I said, okay, try one thing. Just take 5 minutes. 5 minutes, do one thing together that you both enjoy. That's all you need to do, just 5 minutes. And you'll find that you enjoy it so much, that it's so satisfying, you will want to do it again. And you will find more things. But just take that first step. Just try one. I used to tell people, I said, just start and then hop on for the ride.
And what were the staff like? What were the people that worked at the care facility like? Were
Wonderful.
they okay?
Wonderful. I mean, mother, one of the things that mother valued so much was being of use, was being of value.
Yeah.
And so one day with the kitchen staff, when they were getting ready for lunch, and they were putting the napkins out, and I said, okay, give me all the napkins. And I tossed them all into a bowl and I threw them down on the table. And I said, Mom, do you think you can help me fold those napkins? And she did, and she folded them really quickly and then put them on each other's plates. And I said, Mother, thank you. That was so nice of you. And sometimes I would take them when she wasn't looking and roll them up again and toss them again, and she'd do it again. But it was something she could
Yeah.
do for others, which mattered to her. But she had 2 best friends who were always looking about for something to do. Phyllis, who didn't speak at all, and Kathleen, who was very stern. And somehow they met in the middle. They were best friends. But they were, but she had best friends. Everyone needs friends. I mean, the other thing I realized after all that time with mom and in assisted living is that there are certain basic human needs that we all share and always will. And one is the need for friends,
Mm.
and one is the need for laughter, and another is the need to be of value, and the other is to give and receive love. And she had the opportunity to do all of that on her own terms with her own family in assisted living. It's a gift.
It is, and I've talked to other people that we do seem to have we have a very odd society at the moment where we have the ability to connect, in theory, with anybody in the world. You know, we pick up this device and we can immediately connect with somebody in Seattle. I'm in London. Yesterday I was talking to somebody in Hawaii, and it just like that. And so we have that ability to connect, but all the research shows that loneliness has never been a bigger thing. That I think 35% of under 30-year-olds don't have a best friend, or they have at most 2 friends, and it does show just the importance of making those human connections. That yes, we can connect with people on the phone, we can talk to people on video calls, which is wonderful, but there is something about holding somebody's hand, look at somebody in the eye, all those things that we can only do in person. And I do hope my children and their children do find a way to keep that sort of physical importance of friendship going. Because I've talked to other people that partners have had dementia and things, and you either go 2 ways. One is if the partner dies, the person becomes even more introverted, doesn't want to speak to anybody else, just becomes almost a shadow of themselves, and you can imagine what happens. They very quickly go downhill. And you have your story, on the other hand, where your mum care for your dad, love your dad, obviously. But then when he sadly passed away, she sort of metaphorically shook the dust off and said, "Right, I'm going to get these new friends now and become this new group." And you ended up with all the all these more members than you needed. Probably, it's yeah, friendship's just, it sounds silly, but friendship is just so important.
Mhm.
It really, really is. And I'm so glad that the facility allowed that and fostered that friendship to happen, really. And let you be part of that friendship group as well. So, yeah. I'm not sure there's a question there. It was just a statement, really, that we seem to be, yeah, able to connect, but disconnected at the same time. So, yeah.
Yeah, it was so wonderful. And I would invent things. So we had routines when I would visit. So I would give everyone a shoulder massage, and I would say, "Would you like a shoulder massage?" And they wouldn't necessarily know what I meant, but they would see the person next to them having so much fun. So I did. And so I would, that was my routine, that I would, at lunch, I would give people shoulder massages. And one day, and I got the best compliment of my entire life from a woman named Gloria. She came up to me and she said, "Do you tuck your wings in a handkerchief when you're not here?" Isn't that
Wow.
wonderful?
I would have that. I would have that tattooed on my right across here. I think. Now, how beautiful is that? Wow. Wow. It's funny as well because my mum, before she had dementia years ago,
Yeah.
there's a thing in the UK called pets therapy, where you can get trained and take your dog into care homes, and people like dogs and stroke that, and she would find that people, well, yes, they talk with the dog for a second, but people just wanted to talk to somebody. They just wanted somebody to be there to listen and to be a friend, really. It didn't matter
Mhm.
whether my mum would say she'd go and see Mary, was one particular lady, and they pretty much had the same conversation every time, but it didn't matter. The lady was getting to talk. The dog sort of fell asleep under a chair, and mum was there just to listen and talk and things. And it's yeah, I think friendship, no matter how it comes about, how it's created, whether it is angels like you or humans like the rest of us, it's super important to offer that and to be willing to share time. Really, so that's the most precious. We can't create
Yes.
more time. It's what do we choose to do with the time that we have. That's the main thing, I guess.
And with no judgment. That was
Yeah.
the thing for me. Visiting mom, being with mom, wasn't even visiting anymore. It was being with mom.
Mhm.
Um, it was so peaceful. I would surprise people and I say, "I just need a rest. I'm going to go to assisted living and be with the ladies of assisted living. It's so peaceful." And they would look at me and go, "What are you talking about?" And I said, "You'd be surprised. It
Yeah.
is real time. It's just, there are no stress. It's just peaceful." And and the day mom died, the next day I went there just to be with them because it was, they were reminiscing about mom. It was just, I can't, I can't, I mean, my goal with this book, which I should have added before when you asked me about the book, is that, and you mentioned it, that so many people think of people living with dementia as empty shells where
Mm.
someone used to be, as lives not worth living. And until we get over that, think that they are not lives worth living, we're never going to give them the care and the support that they and their care partners need and deserve to thrive and to live with happiness. And even to say the word thrive, so many people look at you and go, "What are you talking about? They
Yeah.
can't thrive." And it's like, yes, yes, they can. These are wonderful people. So that was the other reason I wrote the book. I wanted people to, I want to help change the narrative.
So no, I think one of your sisters said to you that mum's been gone for years, or mum's not the same now, mum's different, whatever. But I guess
Oh,
being different isn't a bad thing. Like the painting, the creativity, the laughter, the joy, all those things. It's yes, accepting that things are going to be different, but accepting, as you say, that there's a purpose. That once you have the diagnosis of dementia or Alzheimer's, that isn't it. That's the next stage and what's going to happen next, I guess. Yeah, different.
that's the hardest part. It's the hard. It's once mom was light years ahead of me. Once there was that first section. Oh my God, how long have I been like this? And that fear.
Yeah.
and all you can do is be there with them. But once they make that transition,
Hmm.
then you need to make it too, because so many people are thinking about how I would feel if I had dementia. Well, you don't, and you can't, and that's not the point. It's not about you. Um, and what my sister once said to me, she said, "Mom left us years ago." And I said, "Well, if she left, who's there?" And that's when I realized, I said, I believe that it's a person well worth getting to know. And it's hard for most people because they want to bring them back.
Yeah.
And it's like, you're not going to bring them back. It's only going to frustrate them and frustrate you. So you need to accept them and join them where they are.
Mm.
And that's where that's where you find the joy, not fighting it anymore, accepting. Um, so yeah, it's interesting, the whole care partner journey for me and mom, because years and years before, when they first moved to Horizon House, it wasn't far from where I lived with in a big house with a bunch of friends. And she hadn't developed dementia at that point. And one day she arrived unexpectedly, and I was taking a nap, and she laid down next to me and she told me she loved me. And I remember crying because I'd never heard that word from her before. And but I didn't do anything. I just lay there and cried. And mom said, "I guess I should have said that more often." And our lives as care partners unlocked all that love that was waiting so long to express itself. And that's what I treasure most about my experience with mom.
Yeah. Yeah. I wasn't sure whether to ask this next question. You don't have to answer it. But obviously, you have a family history of this disease, this illness. How do you feel about your life going forward? Is it something that holds you in fear? Is it something that you know how to deal with now? Is it something that you'll go into the assisted living before you need to? What? Yeah.
Well, I'm of course there's always that worry behind you because of how if you could develop dementia.
Mm.
And but so there's certain basic things you can do. You know, you can eat well and you can
Mm.
sleep and make sure your hearing's okay, and you can have friends, which is really important. Doing things with people. I have found for me the most important thing is that I have purpose. Um, I have a job that is valuable to so many people. I mean, just my experience with mom led me to working with Mods Awards. It's led me to things. I mean, as you know, empathy is not my was not my strong suit growing up, but my ability, the lessons I learned being a care partner, which is to listen and to put others first
Mhm.
and to ask how they are before I tell them how I am. And and it enabled me to believe that I can love and be loved, which I didn't grow up that way. Um, and so, as I'm worried, of course, about all of that, but I can't really do much except just live the best life I can with as much joy and purpose as possible, with as many people as possible. And oh, and exercise too. And I'm not that good at that, but I used to be. But and I work too hard. But other than that,
Yeah. But like you said, the work, it's important to you, and it's important to lots of other people. And can you tell us a little bit about the Maud Awards?
I'm sorry. What?
Can you tell us a little bit about the Maud Awards and the work that
Oh
you
yeah.
do?
And it was interesting because I met Richard Ferry, who's the founder, um, and I met him when I was talking about the art at Horizon House, and he was there. And then he started to be interested in mom and the art, and his wife developed dementia in 2013, and he had no idea what to do.
Mm.
He kept looking and reading and trying to figure out how can I bring joy and happiness to her life, and he wasn't having a lot of success because there's so much, deep dark pessimism out there. And So he said, well, I'm going to start Maud's Awards, and I'm going to give awards for people who've done wonderful things. And then maybe I'll find wonderful things that will help other people and and it will help Maud. And, and so this is we're starting our 5th year. And so every year we give away 3 organizations, each get $25,000, and excuse me, 5 individuals each get $5,000. And then we actually produce a handbook every year, which will talk about all the innovative ideas that have come our way. And everything's free. And what I love so much about Richard is that he not only was doing this to find something for Maud and for him, but he wants to share it with as many people as possible, that he wants to do good. And so my ability to work with and for Maud and doing good, it's very fulfilling. And it's through that I met so many people. Because when I became a caregiver, I had no idea. I had never heard the term living with dementia. I had only heard the term suffering from.
Yeah.
And I kept thinking, when I heard people living with, I would go, what are they talking about? And so they taught me. And because of Mom, I was starting to actually listen. I remember in shock when Mom would greet everybody with a smile and a compliment. And I thought, well, that's a lovely thing to do, but I never thought of doing it myself. Something Mother did. But then when I started doing it, it was like, oh, this is fabulous. Everyone's so much happier, including me, when I do this. It was, it's a constant world of discovery.
You and Richard sound quite similar in that you could have left the art with your mom, and that would have been fine because she got joy from it, you got joy from it, people around her got joy from it. But the fact you decided it was valuable to share, I think, it's a lot about you, I think. And exactly as you said, if you go to the library, to the bookstore, a lot of the books about dementia they're not on anybody's Christmas list, are they? They're really
Yeah.
not. And they're books about either practical things, how to cope, or they are things about how to manage finances. But there's not the creative, happy side of dementia. There's not the books about living with dementia,
Yeah.
thriving with dementia, as you said. And that's what people need. They need a reason to think, okay, this is what it is, but there's a lot of positive things that can happen now. This isn't the end of anything.
And there, near the end of the book, I say, if I knew then what I know now,
Yeah.
my life with Dad would have been so much better, because I learned all of this before Dad died.
Mm-hmm.
And with Dad, I could have just sat with him. I could have made him realize that he wasn't going to be abandoned. I could have brought him his favorite food. I could have given him a shoulder massage, which he adored. And I could have told him I loved him. But I didn't do those things. So it's almost sort of like I have to pay it forward and do it for other people, because he would have been happier. And it's what I learned. It's what I felt. It's what Mom felt. I mean, it didn't matter. Mother didn't necessarily know who I was all the time, but she knew she liked me, and she knew she was happy to see me. And that's all that mattered.
Yeah.
It was, I mean, well, so the book is just filled with all these discoveries I made about Mom, and all the lessons I learned about Mom, all the opportunities about joy. And there were occasional difficulties. It was interesting that once we had a routine. Every time I would leave, Mother would hug me and she would say, don't work too hard. And one day she didn't do that. She came with me. She walked with me to the elevator with every intention of leaving with me, and looked at me with great trust. And I was looking around for her friends, for Phyllis, for Kathleen, someone, or an activity, but nothing was going on. But I couldn't just leave her. So we sang. So we started to sing Good Night Ladies together. And we walked around and around the hallways. And whenever we passed a nurse's station, they would join in. Whenever we see another resident, they would join in. And after about 3 rounds of the hallways, we got back to her apartment, and she turned to me and she said, don't work too hard, and hugged me. And so it was just these and it was not that it was something I had planned. It's just that we enjoy do this. So leave on a high note. Don't leave them alone. So it's just things like that, day after day after day. And I'm a much nicer person now than I used to be. Much happier now than I used to be.
So you said before that you sort of recognize the need to love yourself, and that makes you open to the love of others. So is there love in your life now? Love and happiness?
Um, well, probably I would say that it's love through. I work too hard. I work too hard. Um, and the book was a gift. That was one of that. So now I'm sort of looking for the next thing. I mean, one thing I do every year, which is I'm a little late on this year, which is every year I make cookies and give them to people. Um, and I made last year 2,000 cookies
Oh my!
using 60 pounds of butter. And these are not chocolate chip cookies.
Wow.
These are productions. And so, but this friend of mine in Texas, I told him yesterday, I said, the cookies are going to be late. I've been too busy. And he said, whenever you send them, that's fine. They're an act of love. And I wrote him back and I said, thank you for saying that. That was so lovely. But the cookies were funny because when I would, once Evelyn was a really good friend of mine, she was 104. And she lived in assisted living, not because she had dementia, but because she was 104. And one day she wasn't feeling well. And she said, I think it's time for me to die. And everybody started to say, oh, Evelyn, and saying how much we loved you, love you, loved you, love you. And they started visiting her. And I went up to her and I said, Evelyn, I'm going to make you some cookies. And so I brought her this platter of fabulous cookies, and she revived. And from then on, the women of assisted living decided that my cookies were the secret to a long life.
I love that.
And so whenever I would get there, Ruby, who was from Atlanta, whenever I would leave, she said, get in the kitchen and start cooking. And she would hand me a box so I could put them in the next time. And so it's just opportunities to share things with people, um, to share love with people. I guess that's what I do now. Um, that is what I do now.
I think that's a wonderful place to end. Just thank you so much for your time. It's been an absolute honor to listen to you. It was wonderful to read the book. I'll put the links to the book in the notes and everything. I would encourage anybody to, yeah, have a look at it, buy it. It's a joyful read. It's not depressing. It's interesting, engaging, uplifting. So yeah, thank you so much.
Thank you. It's been a pleasure.